So today's goal, now that you've learned about which technology to actually put forward for an award-winning submission, now what are the critical elements to make an award-winning submission, and how do you manage things like the timeline? Do you use outside consultants? Who manages the submission process? So we're going to talk to some experts today who are actual FLC repeat award winners on how they manage the process, how they engage others to help with the submissions, how they gather all that information from the stakeholders, and how they work with the team that's needed to draft and review everything for the final submissions, and make sure that it actually meets the criteria for that particular category. So I wanted you to get a sense of who the panelists are, who we've got here to my esteemed experts today. First, we're going to have Alan Jones. He's a communications director for defense projects at TechLink. Now, TechLink, they manage the FLC award nominations, and he does a lot of extra stuff, as you can see here, including writing, editing, and managing DoD's SBIR, RIF, CRADA, and licensing success stories for TechLink's economic impact study. So he's going to give us a broad overview on how they manage the process. Then we're going to have Linda von Fetticher. Hopefully I said that properly, or at least close enough. She is Sandia's technical business development specialist and Sandia's science and technology park program leader. So she has been doing the FLC regional and national awards for Sandia for the last 12 years. So she is certainly an expert on writing and managing the awards program for them. We also have Michelle Newton. She's a communication specialist for my own institute, the National Cancer Institute. So kudos to Michelle. So she does a lot of our newsletters, marketing, the NCI's Tech Showcase, in addition to the awards program. And finally, we have Nancy Picard, who's a communications consultant for Flentech. They're the outside consultant that has helped Oak Ridge, win several awards for the last several years. So she's, as I said, going to give us a couple of tips on how to write a better award.
Thank you, Whitney, and thank you to the FLC for asking me to be a part of this. It's an honor. I appreciate it. So as mentioned, I work for TechLink. TechLink is a DoD and Department of Veterans Affairs partnership intermediary. We're affiliated with Montana State University in Bozeman, Montana. On behalf of TechLink, I work on seasonally on the FLC award nominations, as well as SBIR, RIF, CRADA licensing success stories. I've been at TechLink for about 4 years now, a familiarity with the writing process and with the editing process. So I can shape a good narrative, if you will. So what I thought I would talk about is how we go about choosing the awards that we work on, the process of that, and then just very briefly a few of the things that I see in awards that recurring errors, things that we can improve time and time again within the awards that we receive. So the first stage in our process, we reach out to our member labs and we ask for possible nominees, and they bring us some ideas and we review them for viability. Some of them look great coming out of the box. Some of the others maybe need a little bit more time in the oven. Maybe it's a little bit early to consider them for a nomination. It all depends. Once we agree that a nomination is ready to proceed, I have a small stable of contract writers that I work with in TechLink, and I will assign a given nomination to a writer that typically I try to match the skill set of the writer and the background of the writer with the particular nominee and the technology. In terms of timeline, I try to give the writer about a month to conduct the interviews and gather materials. once the nomination is at a place where the writer can share it, then I go through it and I work with the writer to shape it and get it ready for review by the principals. I then leave a couple of weeks for the principals for the labs to review the nomination and make sure everything is factually correct and that they're being presented as they would like to be presented. Once that's all done, then it comes back to me. I do a final review and I then give it back to the labs to make the nomination. I think if there's a theme to it, there's two particular elements that I especially look for. The first is clarity. So that encompasses being able to describe the technology in a clear and understandable fashion. So if the writer really gets what the technology is about and is able to communicate it, my baseline, I try to, in the back of my mind, I'm trying to think, well, can a high school senior understand this technology? Is it clear enough that most of us can understand it on our first read? I'm a pretty bright guy. I have a pretty good reading comprehension. If I don't understand the technology and the processes on the first read of the nomination, then it needs some more work. Then I suggest that we need to go back and clarify. Does the nomination communicate the excellence? Does it really let the reader know that this is exceptional in any number of ways? In terms of narrative, this is one of the things that I particularly look for, particularly in the excellence in tech transfer nominations. Is there a story behind it that is easily communicated? Are there obstacles that have been overcome? Has there been demonstrated creativity in the processes? I think that really helps with the readability, with the creating of a compelling narrative. It helps a given nomination stand out if there is a story behind it. I also encourage writers to gravitate toward objective metrics if they're available. If there is a way to say that this particular nomination has resulted in $10 million in commercial sales, or what have you. If there is a number we can attach to the success to back up our statement that this is an exceptional nomination, then that's very helpful as well. Further, under clarity, and I think Nancy is going to speak to this as well later. I look forward to answering questions at the end.
Thanks, Alan. That was great.
Alan, that was wonderful. First off, I want to say thank you for the opportunity. It's wonderful to be here. And I'll just touch on a little bit of my background. I am a technical business development specialist. That's kind of like my title here at Sandia. And also, I am the program leader for the Sandia Science and Technology Park on behalf of the labs. Sandia puts great importance on the FLC award program, and winning FLC awards is a tremendous honor for the individuals nominated and for our lab. So we're really, really proud of that. And for the past 12 years, I've led Sandia's nomination development process for the FLC National and Regional Awards Program. Basically, we've kind of centralized it. You know, the lab is huge. We centralized it out of our department, and it does take teamwork. But I think one of the first things that this is ongoing, and I know you have a call for nominations that goes out, and that's a very limited time frame. So a production schedule really needs to be developed to ensure deadlines are met. And we want to make sure the deadlines allow time for writing, for editing, for approvals, for uploading, you know, on your platform. But it's a year process. We're constantly collecting, gathering a lot of information throughout the year. And some of the things are materials that are already written at Sandia Annual Reports. Another project that I manage as well is our Sandia Partnerships Annual Report. So that's a good resource. We look at R&D 100 award nominations, press releases, news articles, marketing sheets, and other published materials to use as background. And a lot of these written materials can include many points that are useful and relevant to answer the questions and stick to the FLC nomination criteria. But also what's key, again, teamwork. We reach out to all of our folks in our licensing, CRADA, and business development departments, as well as talking to PIs on certain projects, or contact our scientists and the ones that we've worked on projects in the past. We can ask them if they've had new projects and if they think are interesting or worthy of exploring an FLC nomination. So you can imagine we can get a lot. We can get a lot through the year. So that's a lot of vetting. That's a lot of really narrowing down. And the benefits of that is that they have a valuable experience, skill, knowledge, and experience in writing nominations. They're able to capture key concepts and concisely explain complex, technical information in layman's terms, with a marketing perspective, which is, I believe, is critical to a successful nomination, something that's clear, particularly for the judges to understand. It's about telling a story that is compelling. And just because it's technical doesn't mean it can't be interesting. So we want to include information about how, people have persevered, they were creative, or came up with new ways to do something. So, working with our writers, they're able to deliver nominations knowing the specific criteria and what the FLC looks for in a winning entry. So again, some of the other things I'd like to touch on how we get down, again, the components and the elements. All we need from them is some time for them to provide their expertise, knowledge, information, and for order us to write it, get a draft, get things sent back to them and the partners, make sure that all approvals are made, and to really engage them. We want to remind them that this is their chance to shine and tell people about what they have accomplished. And many of our Sandians and partners love, the free publicity and the support this effort brings to them. So again, once we kind of get all that, then we can kind of look at our list, we can sort it, we can evaluate, narrow down the ideas to develop a really tight potential nominee list that fits the categories and the criteria. Sometimes, they're premature and they need to wait, or they do not meet the criteria. Sometimes ideas fit in a different category than originally planned, but it's better to have too many because sometimes they do drop off. So then once I have this tight list that fits in the criteria, and a lot of times we're really narrowing it down because of the short time frame, and what is that, about 5, 8 weeks, 10 weeks, something like that to get that done. That list is then taken, and then it's presented to my Sandia leadership and management team for their support and approval, knowing that the ones that I put forth to them have been vetted, they're approved, the partners, the scientists, the managers are all on board. So we try to get all of that up front before they see the list. And this way, it makes it a smoother transition in order to meet the FLC timeline. So there's a lot of herding, a tremendous amount of herding. And then, because we do get a lot, not everyone is going to make the cut this year. Whatever technology, whatever tech transfer story we're trying to communicate, there's a limit on how many words that are going to fit on the platform. So it needs to be really concise, really compelling. It needs to answer the questions clearly and really give a story that can become a winning nomination. So that's how we kind of go about it in a nutshell.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's very interesting that the way you orchestrate the whole process and project manage it essentially from start to finish. I like that.
Well, and I'd like to give kudos to our writer because she's critical, and that makes the difference.
Sure. So thank you. It is an honor to be able to present, and I'm also learning so much through sitting through this discussion today. So it definitely is a valuable use of time. My name is Michelle Newton. I work for the NCI, that's the National Cancer Institute Technology Transfer Center, and I am a communications specialist. I also work in a specialized unit that focuses on marketing of our inventions to external partners. So next slide, please. So yeah, I wanted to provide some perspective on my role so that you would have context for some of my comments. I do support a wide range of communications projects. So the FLC awards aren't the only thing on my radar, but it certainly kind of fits right in with the types of communications that we're taking on. I don't have a science background, but I have to say I've worked in TTC for several years now, and I've certainly, I know and understand a lot more about the science taking place than I did several years ago. And I've also learned such a great deal about our technology transfer process, in particular, since I work for this marketing unit, and that is one of the things that we're looking to explain to our potential partners. So the Technology Transfer Center, we provide technology transfer support to the NCI and to 9 other NIH institutes. I've worked on some projects where some of the foundational discoveries and technologies, some of that took place back in the 70s. And, those discoveries, they're coming to market today. So it can be a challenge to identify a full candidate for a Technology Transfer Center award, because there have been so many different players and steps in that process. And so just trying to be able to, find all the right people so that you could identify the full story. It can be a challenge. I do rely upon our team of technology transfer managers to help unpack the science and the technology involved. And again, many times, the technology transfer manager that I might be working with, they might be involved currently, but there's some detective work to help kind of translate some complex science into a narrative that can be easily understood by our FLC judges who, come to the table with just a broad array of backgrounds. So next slide. So for me, the best case scenario for putting together an award is if I could work with a technology transfer manager who will pull together a solid first draft. And this certainly works. It expands the timeline. And so I found if I could start with this draft that a technology transfer manager is willing to put together, that's kind of the best case scenario. And then I look to edit and polish that draft. We did have a tech transfer award that went through where the technology transfer manager wrote the award, and at the regional level, even though the invention was really remarkable, it did not win at the regional level because it was people just could not understand what it was. And I then went back and worked with the team to rewrite the award, and it won at the national level. So one of the other really important things that I do for this process is just manage this whole review process. And there are many stakeholders. So there's the scientific team, there's the technology transfer managers that I mentioned, unit supervisors, TT unit supervisors are part of that review process. And of course, our external partners, the NCI Office of Communications has to review. And then the final review is by NCI's TT director. Next slide. So being part of this process, and I think it's been about 7 years now that I've been involved in these awards. I've learned several lessons. All of those, I completely agree. I think Nancy will really touch on that. But another lesson learned is to encourage all of these different reviewers to make sure that they focus on just looking at the content and making sure it's accurate and complete. I've had reviews where it goes to a reviewer and they decide that they want to completely rewrite the award, and it just kind of blows up all of the content and it sets the timeline off. And then recently, this past year, I volunteered to be an FLC judge. And I'm so glad that I made the time in my schedule to do this. It made me appreciate the competition that's involved. And it really was an opportunity to see what sets a winning nomination apart and where some nominations fall short. And, quite frankly, even can be frustrating for a judge when you're, searching for information that might, in the answers to a question, that can be a frustrating experience. And that's certainly something that I want to make sure that we avoid whenever we put an award together. And another interesting outcome for me, I really came to appreciate how different all of the lab missions are and the various roles and abilities, constraints that different labs have to conduct technology transfer. And so I think a takeaway for me as we put together our awards this year will be to make it really easy for the judges to understand our lab's mission and our ability to conduct technology transfer. And then from that, the excellence that's demonstrated in the award. So given that we're dealing with biomedical innovation, there are certain roles and things that we, just really can't do. But that, in light of that, being able to just call out the excellence and the innovation that we were able to demonstrate. So
Thanks, Michelle. That was excellent. And I think it's a perfect segue into Nancy's talk, where she'll talk a little bit about how she got involved in working with Oak Ridge and some tips for writing a winning submission everybody can take home.
So I work for Fuentech, which is a tech transfer consultancy. We have, on our team, we have two teams that work very closely together. We have technology transfer consultants who have a combination of technical expertise and business acumen. And then we have a communications team, writers, graphic designers, web developers. And by collaborating closely, we bring together the skills that are needed for both developing and implementing technology transfer strategies, but also in talking about technology transfer successes. So my background is a writer and editor, and I've written several of the awards for Oak Ridge, as well as other federal labs. And in the last few years, I've been managing the efforts of our team of writers. One of the things I've really been focusing on is coming up with an efficient and effective process to put out a lot of nominations in the short period of time that's available, and working efficiently and effectively with our client. In the interest of time, I'm going to skip over the process stuff that I was thinking of sharing and instead just get right into the writing tips, because I think that there are 4 things that I want to emphasize today as places to really focus your efforts as writers to make sure that you've got a strong nomination. And that is the title, the use of subheads, effective use of bullets, and then your tone and your language. So I'm going to cover each of these individually, starting with the next slide, and we're going to start with the title. So this is the place where you really set the stage and grab the attention of the judges. And title that can really focus on what Mike was talking about, how in choosing their nominations, they focus on where is there a demonstration of excellence, but also what's on a path to impact, and that impact is really important. So as you can see on the next slide, you've got the option of either focusing on the facts of the situation, who's the federal lab, what was the agreement, what was the technology that was transferred, and who was the recipient. Now, obviously, that's more than the 10 words that we're usually limited to on a award for excellence, but still, that's sort of a just the facts, ma'am type of title. But if you look at something on the right, where you're really focusing on the outcome and the impact, and the idea that a 3D printed silicon carbide technology is bringing zero carbon energy production to the US, that's letting the judges know right off the bat that this is an important story and it's worth paying attention to and worth giving recognition to in an award. Next slide. So when you've got a great story to tell, that certainly is a huge part of it, but you've got to be able to do it clearly. And subheads are a great way to guide the judges through your nomination and to make sure that they are seeing that you're hitting all of the criteria. So we're going to look at a couple of examples of an award that we submitted last year. So the first question is to describe the technology that was transferred, focusing on its advantages and the need or problem that it addressed. And what we did in our nomination, and obviously you won't be reading this, but you can see by the subheads in bold, the need, the technology solution. It really helps the reader to see that we're covering both of those things. And within the solution section, there are even a next layer down, a second level subheads in italics, the benefits of the technology. So we're hitting the advantages, the applications for the technology, so how it can be used, how it works, and how the licensee is using it. And having those subheads really guide the judges through and make sure we're hitting all of the criteria in the question. So let's look at the next question, which was number 2, and that is, who was the recipient of the transferred technology and what were the goals and objectives of each partner? Well, in that first bit at the top, that's where we clearly state who the recipient was. And then again, we use subheads to separate out the goals of the licensee, which in this case was USNC, and the goals of Oak Ridge. And then again, second level subheads help to really hammer home what those goals were, that it was strengthening a focus on safe nuclear energy and manufacturing designs faster and at a lower cost and creating safer nuclear fuel. That for the licensee, those were their goals, and they're just jumping right off the page at the judges. And so that's another example of the use of subheads. So let's look at one more example from this same nomination. This is a really important question. I'm assuming this isn't changing too much from last year to this coming year. This is the question that has the most points, and it's really where you tell the tech transfer story. And making sure that you cover how it was initiated, what were the mechanisms, what were the activities, and specifically describing the excellence in the tech transfer effort. Subheads are a great way to guide your reader, the judge, through the story that you're telling. And that's particularly helpful if the story starts before the partnership was initiated, which was the case in this example. So you can see we've got subheads indicating that part of the story was how Oak Ridge was advancing the technology readiness and doing demonstrations and proactively and collaboratively securing the IP protection. Then it was initiating the partnership. So it makes, by using the subheads, the judge isn't starting off thinking like, yeah, but I don't even know how this was started. It's there. It's really clear that it's there. And so we find that subheads are a really effective way of making it clear that we're checking all the boxes and hitting all of the points to be made. Next slide. So now when it comes to readability, bullets, as has been mentioned already, are a great way to go. And so I've got sort of a before and after example to show you. If you'll go to the next slide, in an early draft of the nomination, we had this paragraph, which is a well-written paragraph. There's nothing wrong with it in and of itself. It's a solid paragraph, but we realized, if you go to the next slide, that if we kept the first 2 sentences and then took the next 3 sentences and put them basically in bullets, there are no more words in this version than in the previous version, but it makes it much more clear the 3 key actions that the researchers were taking that contributed to the success of the tech transfer effort. And if you go to the next slide, you'll see that if you use bolding, then those actions are really popping off the page. And so you can see that their action words are clearly highlighted, and it makes it so much easier for the judges to understand the story that you're telling. Now, a lot of this is formatting stuff, and it sounds like a lot of flash over substance, and that's where we're going to talk in the next slide about the substance of it and the tone of what you're trying to convey. You've got an excellent story that you're telling, and you have to tell it in a way that that excellence is really clear. So I'm going to bring up a paragraph that's going to show you, it's actually, I think, a pair of paragraphs on the next slide. You can go ahead and skip to it. And we've got some paragraphs here. And it's not that you need to read this, but when you go to the next slide, you can see where those words of excellence are incorporated into the narrative, that we're focusing on emphasizing things like experience and expertise of the people involved, working efficiently, navigating complex situations, working quickly and proactively, streamlining, making things easier and more flexible, taking risks into consideration and mitigating those risks. Those kinds of pieces of the story and that kind of tone in your writing really helps them see that this is in fact an example of excellence. And so I hope these examples have been helpful to you. Like I said, it's something we've been doing for quite a few years for Oak Ridge. We've had a lot of success through a combination of our writers and a really solid process. And that's about it for me for today.
Nancy, that was fantastic. Like, I think I've learned so much just about even just general writing, not just for FLC awards, but just communicating messages in general. That's excellent. I don't know if we haven't received any messages in the chat. Feel free if you have any questions to ask these panelists, even if we don't get to them during this session, because I know we're tight on time with about 2 minutes left. We can still continue to answer them as we move into the next session.
With a couple of things, I know what I'm going to be doing is, especially since it's going to be different this year, the first thing I'm going to do is go into the system and see what are the questions, how have they changed, what are the word counts, what are the points, because that really helps us as writers to focus our efforts and to really look year to year, and as a new year comes in, what is it that what is the story that we need to be telling, and how do we need to tell it? What are the restrictions and the opportunities to tell that story in an effective way?
It's a great point, Nancy. Get in there, look at the criteria, look at the questions. I would add, give yourself enough time. Build in more time than you think you need. Wrinkles and problems always arise. You can never anticipate everything.
That as we're closing the loop, we did get a question in the chat on average, how many hours do you think you individually spend putting together a submission?
That could be interviews, that could be, editing, that could be, yeah, it could be all the little details, but then, you put my time on that as well. So it's a timely endeavor. And I think you really need to be organized. make that production schedule and do allow time in there for anything that might arise.
I see that we are just past, I don't know, Michelle, if you have one final thing to say before we hop on to the next panel.
I'll just say that I'm interested to learn about the new award submission portal. So, since I've worked on the FLC awards for several years, when I first started, they were we had to fax the award in. Then we do an online submission process. I think that was influential in really helping to push that we could, do things like bullets. The first iteration didn't even have the plugins where you could do bullets, and it took away from your word count. It contributed to the time involved. So I'm really interested to see, what this next generation platform will be. And it does take a significant amount of time to put the awards together. Echo everything that everyone else has said.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you all so very much. This is a very educational panel, and I hope the audience learned a lot on how they can submit their award next year.
We have Whitney Hastings, who's been instrumental in this entire process. She is with the National Cancer Institute as a Senior Technology Transfer Manager. We also have Hannah Farquhar. She's with the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory as a Business Development Executive. And Maria, I'm not going to try to butcher your name, so I'm going to let you introduce yourself because I'm afraid I might actually butcher your